How about this? It's the most important tool in fantasy football right now.
You are the first show that I've done with glasses.
Ooh.
Yeah. Feel honored. That's a huge honor, my man. It's not.
You're looking great. You're looking very smart.
Thank you. Yeah, thank
double
you.
Smart
thank
now.
you.
We're double counting, like we often do with fantasy football.
with everything, yeah. with literally anything fantasy football. It's been a change, man. I don't know if you have relatively bad eyesight or bad eyesight, or if you have a prescription, but I put these glasses on. I got them yesterday. My eyesight's not bad enough where I have to necessarily wear them all the time, but I'm one of those people that when I see an enhancement or when I just feel so much better, like I changed my diet 3-4 years ago and I just felt so good that I don't want to ever not do what I do now because I just feel so much better, right? And I feel that way while wearing these glasses, man. Like I feel like I can see through walls at this point. My eyes are just so much better. So I think I might just wear them often.
This is someone who is going to win Best Ball Mania and place 1 through 10 this year.
Yeah, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves because I might have a little bit too much Zach Charbonnet with all of the Kenneth Walker stuff going on. But we'll talk about that in a second. The thing that I really want to kick things off with is Coachspeak Index. It's been something that has really, really done. You've done an amazing job with it over the last year or so. And I know you sent that like montage video out. Was that the 1 year anniversary?
1 year anniversary
of Coachspeak Index? Yeah. So you sent that montage out. I was very honored to be part of that in some form whenever we had that big ship chasing live stream. But it's still, a relatively new thing to the fantasy football space, but you've done a great job growing it and getting it out there. Before we get into Coachspeak Index, what that's all about, I want you to just let the listeners know what you're about, who you are, where you come from, all that good stuff.
Oh my God, it's much too long for just one show. I had a really crazy upbringing. I was raised in a cult in North Carolina and got out of that at 20 years old, started to get out of it. But
wow.
Yeah, and it's kind of, of course it's shaped who I am, right? And there are a lot of things that, I would have liked to have enjoyed a normal childhood where I could have played sports and I loved NBA and I wasn't allowed to watch NBA. I had to follow it in the newspaper because we weren't allowed to watch television.
Wow.
Yeah, so that just like made me want to watch it even more.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and then as an adult I really got into NFL and all these experiences just kind of shaped me. My father wasn't part of this cult. Everyone else in my family, it wasn't like a commune thing. It was, going to church like 4 or 5 times a week, and the pastor had to make all of the decisions for you. You had a life decision. You had to bring it to the pastor, and just like very oppressive. None of the God is love stuff. Just God could come back at any moment. And, you're going to hell if you don't do exactly every single thing that I say.
Wow.
Yeah. So if I was able to get out of that because my dad, the one thing that he put his foot down on, right? He let my mom control everything else, and which I blamed her for a long time. I don't anymore. She was just doing what she thought was right. It wasn't malicious.
Sure.
But the one thing he put his foot down on was Greg is going to college. That was something that the church didn't want because it opens you up to new experiences. And I went to college and I was like, oh, okay. I like this lifestyle a lot more.
This is a lot better than the other one that I was living.
Yeah.
Right?
So I really got into poker in college, and that ended up leading to a lot of really great friendships and gambling, of course. And I was able to watch sports and really fell in love with NFL. And in this whole process of growing up kind of repressed, it's a lot of daydreaming. It's a lot of reading because you're not allowed to watch anything. So that kind of started to shape who I was, and just a lot of daydreaming and creative thinking. And I think that kind of turned me into a out of the box thinker.
Yeah.
And just the creative problem solving kind of stuff. And for instance, I'll give you a good example of this. Is in 2010, I was working as a brand strategist for my buddy's restaurants in North Carolina, and the World Cup was happening, and England was playing the USA on the second day of the World Cup. And my buddy asked me, "Hey, do you have any ideas of like how can we pack the restaurants for this match?" And I thought for a good like 10, 15 minutes and had this idea. And he was a gambler, so I knew he would love it. I said, "Okay, the US is 7-1 to win this match, according to the bookmakers. So what you do is you say if the US wins, we're going to give away all of the food. There's no cap on how much you can order, no cap on the amount. And if the US wins, it's all free." And now you figure out what your food cost would be if you were to give away all this food for free, and all the restaurants are packed. And then you bet a percentage of that on the US money line to win.
Right.
And they just packed out all their locations. People were ordering like steaks and just crazy amounts of appetizers for the table, and the US ends up drawing that game, so they don't have to give away that food for free. So that's just like one of the types of ideas.
The way your brain thinks about this kind of stuff, and thinks about, I guess, the world even beyond football, just in general. So have you been like throughout, like after college, what kind of stuff were you doing that then led you to where Coachspeak Index, even just starting Coachspeak Index?
A lot of NFL gambling, a lot of fantasy stuff. And I ran an underground high stakes poker game for a long time. And we had home leagues for fantasy there. And, gamblers are very in tune with sports and the NFL, especially. So just, we're constantly talking about that stuff, and also in poker and in this world, it's like, okay, what are the edges, right? What are the angles that will give us a big edge over everyone else that we're playing against? So just kind of always looking for that edge is what led to Coachspeak Index. And this, I think, is one of my I guess least creative ideas. I couldn't believe that no one had done it up to this point. It just seems so like natural that
yes, it is.
Jim Caldwell saying Calvin Johnson completely healthy, definitely not going to be a decoy out there on Sunday. And we just constantly get this from coaches, and Coachspeak has played fantasy football for the 2 decades that I've played. And then in 2020, kind of hit the breaking point with Zach Taylor calling Joe Mixon day to day for weeks. And then he goes on IR and misses the rest of the season. And I was just tired of getting rug pulled, and quickly came to the realization, quickly after a couple decades, but came to the realization of, well, hindsight's 2020. I can go back 6 years on every coach, look at all their actionable coach speak, looking at their press conferences and press conference transcripts and everything that they've said, and just log that into a database and grade each piece of coach speak as true or a lie or a gray area. Put in full comments so I can go back and reference it whenever we get things like language matches of a Pete Carroll saying no hesitation playing Jackson Smith and Jigba. Well, he said no hesitation about these other players in the past, and they played like 30% of snaps in those games.
Right. Yeah, I was going to ask, I mean, we're definitely going to get into the coach speak stuff. First thing I want to say, one of the top things that I always tell people when they're like, hey, how can I, do this as a job? How can I make it in the space? Like, do you have any tips for that? And aside from me telling them to like do what you're good at, be yourself, that kind of thing, which I think is ungodly important. I think it's really, really important to differentiate yourself and find something that's not being served up. And everyone's like, oh, but the industry is so saturated with all of this content and all this stuff. Like, how am I ever going to find something that's not being served up? This is the perfect example, guys, is what Greg's doing with Coachspeak Index. There's something out there that's not being served. And he says, hey, look, this is something that I can do and that I worked on. And now all of a sudden we have a really, really great source to get clips and to see what coaches are saying. And then obviously, what you're saying is the grading system. So let's talk about Coachspeak Index for a little bit. So if you could describe it in a handful of sentences, paragraph, however long you want to talk about it, how would you pitch or describe Coachspeak Index to someone who hasn't checked it out yet?
I'm so terrible at encapsulating these types of things.
Dude, I am too. Yeah. I am too. And they always say that a business isn't good if you can't, describe it in a sentence or whatever. I'm like, screw that. Just tell us what Coachspeak Index is all about.
You go to my letterbox and my movie reviews is just like, I really like this one. Coachspeak Index is a fantasy football tool that it's a Coachspeak solver, and it gives you all of the context that you need to approach each piece of Coachspeak and kind of translate it into how this is going to affect a player for the season. I don't know if that's a good explanation or not.
That's a very, very good and concise. I just wanted to give you breathing room if you wanted to talk any more about it, but that's a very good and concise way of
Yeah. How about this? It's the most important tool in fantasy football right now.
There you go. There you go. So you were mentioning like how you grade coaches and such. You have these like trustworthiness scores and such, to show these meters to show how trustworthy a coach may or may not be. Can you talk a little bit about that process and how those were created? You kind of hinted at it, that you went back like the last 6 years and started to, grade and look at how coaches were talking about their players. And are those things, constantly changing as you get more data in? Like if a guy was really trustworthy for the last 5 years and all of a sudden something changed and he's like, you know what, I'm going to be a jerk to the media and, and to fantasy players all around and just not be trustworthy.
When I started building the database for the Coachspeak Index, Pete Carroll was the first coach that I started with. And originally I was thinking, okay, I'm just going to log everything that these coaches say, and it'll be sort of one big thing of this coach is a liar across the board, or this coach is honest across the board, and very quickly found out, okay, I need to break these down into categories of depth chart, injuries, transactions, usage, and workload, because coaches are sometimes very honest in one category and then, completely unreliable in another. Now some coaches will across the board be very honest or whatever. You rarely see one that's just kind of a liar across the board.
Yeah.
So it's really important to create those categories and put Coachspeak in those categories. I do grade them. I weigh each piece of Coachspeak differently, because there's this whole scale to this, right? Of Zach Taylor calling Joe Mixon day to day, and then he's out for months. Like, that's egregious. But then a coach saying a guy is day to day, and he comes back 3 weeks later. Okay, that's not quite as bad. It's still a strike, but it's not quite as bad. And then you have some coaches who like really nail something, like Dan Campbell talking about David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs' usage last season. Everyone thought that, they spent this high draft pick on Gibbs. Montgomery's buried, and Dan Campbell told us that was not the case, and that Montgomery was going to carry a load for them, which he did. So that, that grades out really well for him. As far as coaches kind of changing their spots, you don't usually see that for a coach who's been in the league a long time. We did see that with Brian Daboll, pretty honest in his first season. And then second season, like pretty unreliable. And Brandon Staley, also kind of the same thing early on, reliable, and then turned completely unreliable. And I think that goes to sort of their psychological profile of
You're
when
right.
things were going well for them. It was easy for them to be
Exactly.
honest. And then when their
Yeah.
backs are up against the wall and their teams are performing horribly, then it's okay. The gamesmanship is coming out now.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it also could just be their like general feelings about life, right?
Right.
Where they're just
Yeah.
like, I don't want to deal with you guys right now. I'm not going to give you an honest answer. Just so I just brush it off and just not worry about it. That's really interesting though. Like that, when things were good, they seemed to be a little bit more trustworthy than when things sort of went south. How difficult is it then? You get like Brian Callahan right now going to Tennessee, new head coach. Obviously he was an offensive coordinator for years. And, most coaches are going to have a coordinator job for some amount of time, for a while. But we might see a college coach get promoted. We might see a special teams coach where I'm sure there's a lot less information on and stuff. How do you do things with newer coaches and implementing the Coachspeak Index?
With the newer coaches, well, of course, we have the kind of qualifiers of insufficient data on the reliability meters, or when we start adding some data, we'll put a low sample size on that. But you look for certain signals from these guys, and one of them, for instance, is they asked Gerard Mayo about an injured player, and he said, "I'm actually not quite sure right now, and I don't want to tell you something, and then that ends up not being true. So I'll just tell you, like, I don't know right now." That's we're not gonna be super bullish and say, okay, everything he says is going to be honest and the truth, but definitely, okay, we're starting to lay kind of a groundwork here for his profile. With Brian Callahan, it's and many of these coaches, it's, first of all, does what they're saying make sense? Does it align with what we are hearing out of training camp? Does it align with what their offensive coordinator is saying as well? When Brian Callahan was in Cincinnati, the things that he was saying didn't always align with what Zach Taylor was saying. Brian Callahan was saying, I want Joe Mixon on the field on all three downs. And Zach Taylor said that Samaje Perine is going to play on third downs, and Joe Mixon isn't going to play that much on third downs. And of course, the head coach won out there. But with Brian Callahan calling the running backs interchangeable, and then Nick Holtz, the offensive coordinator, saying that Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears are 1A and 1B. Then you get the unofficial depth chart coming out where they're listed as co-starters, and then you look at what the GM Rain Carthon has said about Tyjae Spears, that like he's about like that good shit, just like loves this guy. So yeah, you're just like looking for signals. You're not immediately saying, okay, this is an honest guy, or this is a misleading guy. Now, when they do say stuff that misleads, that's a much stronger signal. We kind of saw this with D'Amico Ryans last season with player usage. So it's a work in progress. They're definitely tougher to gauge, obviously, than coaches that we have huge sample sizes on.
Yeah. I mean, it's really no different than like prospecting and prospects and rookies entering the league, right? Where, you have a sample of guys, of veterans that we've seen a lot of. We know that Justin Jefferson's a good wide receiver. We think that Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Neighbors are elite wide receivers, but we haven't necessarily seen that yet. So we're not putting them in the same category as a Justin Jefferson just yet. Similarly, you might be bullish about a guy like Brian Callahan, the way that he's answering questions or how he's aligned with the rest of his coaches, but we don't know for sure yet. So that's great that there's, that open-mindedness to things being a little bit more volatile with those newer coaches. Are there coaches, and I know there are, but which coaches, I should say, have you found to be the most and least trustworthy with all of your years of research and data?
So there are 5 head coaches who have a reliability rating of at least 80% in all 4 categories. That's Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay, Dan Campbell, Todd Bowles, and Nick Sirianni. So all pretty reliable in all those different areas, and they're all pretty candid when they are asked questions about stuff. We see this with Sean McVay on injuries all the time. You ask him an injury question, like he'll answer it. The large majority of the time. And if he doesn't expect a player to play, like he'll tell you, yeah, I don't think this guy's going to be able to play this week, or like it's 50-50 or whatever. And then Dan Campbell, you ask him about how's this player performing in camp, and if they're not performing well, he will tell you that. Same thing with Todd Bowles. So love when these coaches are both candid and reliable. As far as least reliable, we got rid of the 2 least reliable this past coaching cycle with Bill Belichick and Arthur Smith. So the one that we have left now is Robert Saleh, who is extremely unreliable. Really funny situation last year with offensive lineman Dwayne Brown, where he missed 3 days of practice, and Saleh said, or they asked Saleh, is he going to be able to play, missing 3 days of practice? He was like, yeah, he'll be good to go. They put him on injured reserve the very next day. and that's just like one example from Saleh. So yeah.
Do you think that sometimes, like in that Saleh example, like it could just be that he's that disconnected from what's going on with the team? Not to say that would make the Coachspeak Index unreliable, because that's obviously a trait then that could just continue throughout their tenure wherever they're coaching. But do you think that could play a role as well?
I mean, when you see this pattern of these things happening over and over, I just can't believe that this guy has no idea of the operation of his team and like the health of his players.
Right. Yeah. So it's like a combination of like, maybe he sucks as a leader, but also maybe he's just a liar. And either way, he's not a reliable, a coach when it comes to the Coachspeak Index stuff. This episode is sponsored by Underdog Fantasy. If you haven't played over at Underdog yet, now's the perfect time. There are tons of different best ball leagues that you can join, and there's definitely a league out there that fits what you're looking for. And you can use all the things that I've talked about with guests on becoming a best ball bro to crush those drafts. But like I said, now's the right time to join up. Because if you go and you sign up and use promo code late round, you not only get a nice deposit offer, but you also get a free late round draft guide. That's a $25 guide emailed to your inbox after signing up for absolutely free. So head to underdogfantasy.com, sign up using promo code late round, and make a deposit. I can confirm it's a really, really fun platform to play on. Now back to the show. One thing I want to talk to you about is, it's very easy. The whole reason why people talk about Coachspeak, often at least on like fantasy shows and such, is because of the unreliability of what coaches are saying. And obviously you're trying to solve that with Coachspeak Index to say, well, this guy is reliable, this guy isn't reliable. But then oftentimes you'll see fantasy managers run with these ideas of what coaches are saying. One example being, what's going on, let's say with, we're going to talk about some backfields, but let's talk about the Kenneth Walker thing really quick. Where, all the coaches are coming out saying that he's crushing camp. And then you get Ryan Grubb, their offensive coordinator. You had tweeted this the other day, saying that Kenneth Walker is looking like a 3-down back and they want to use him more as a pass catcher. Right. And so obviously, like even myself, I look at that and I'm saying, that's the one piece of information we've really, really been waiting on. They can sit there and say, we're going to use him more, but what is it that Kenneth Walker really needs? It's the pass catching stuff. Like that's the place where what he hasn't had, throughout his college career and now in the NFL. But do you think that there's a fine line in using that information to your advantage and taking advantage of that, and then taking it too far where you can say, I'm going to bump Kenneth Walker up a tier and maybe into that like Mixon, Rashad White range, let's say, as opposed to having him in more of like the Alvin Kamara, David Montgomery, maybe Kamara's not a great example, but David Montgomery range, let's say. And so you bump them up a tier. It's a modest jump, but it's probably pretty easy, and I'm sure you see it all the time, of people taking it a little bit too far. And my question to you is, do you think that people are taking it too far, and how would you balance that and that all that information?
Yeah, well, first, I think the most dangerous thing is when people just automatically dismiss every single piece of coach speak, saying you can never trust what a coach says. So like, we're not paying attention to any of this. This is the reason why I created the Coachspeak Index, is so we can know when we can trust something. As far as believing the coach speak just kind of in a vacuum, not even talking about reliability ratings, I think the most dangerous thing is when we are only accepting it and using it to confirm our priors, and we are never allowing it to change how we feel about players. I think that's a very dangerous spot to be in.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And the other thing that I'll say is I've used it, especially the stuff that you're doing. It's been really, really helpful for my process. I obviously am doing a lot of like player analysis and prospecting work and projecting and projections. And so when I see them say, okay, we're going to use Kenneth Walker more in the passing game, like let's use that as the baseline argument for this situation. I look back and I say, okay, what's the evidence that we have that this would happen, right? You go back, and of course, by the way, on a couple shows that I went on Tuesday or whatever, right before that came out, I talked about, well, they're not talking about Kenneth Walker as a pass catcher. And then literally after I did all these shows, they talked about Kenneth Walker as a pass catcher.
Yeah, I saw your underdog.
Yeah. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, I was like, I have him right now. But regardless, my thing with the Walker stuff, and correct me if I'm wrong with this, because I think it's a really important conversation to have. My thing with the Walker stuff is we have this evidence in college at multiple schools, right? He then goes to the NFL, and in the NFL, not only did they go out and they get Zach Charbonnet, after Kenneth Walker's year one, but Charbonnet in his year one and Kenneth Walker's year two. So last season, was arguably a better pass catcher, got just as much work out of the backfield as a pass catcher. It's literally been like 5 seasons worth of data now that Kenneth Walker has not been a high volume receiver, right? And then when you look at the projections for Seattle, you see DK Metcalf, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Tyler Lockett, Noah Fant, obviously a decent pass catching tight end. You have these bodies there where there's only a 100% target share from a projection standpoint for every team in the league that then gets divvied up. I know that people don't like divvying up targets because targets are earned, and so is target share. But when you have a lot of competition, this is part of my argument against like a DeAndre Swift this year, is like, yes, DeAndre Swift is a pass catching back, but what benefits them more to throw it to DeAndre Swift or to throw it to Rome Odunze or to throw it to Keenan Allen, et cetera, right? Because those 3 guys could each see a 20% plus target share this year. So the way that I kind of consume this information, and again, I would love for you to critique that as someone who is looking at the Coach Speak stuff consistently, is to say, okay, Kenneth Walker has had a sub 8% target share per game rate both years that he's been in the NFL. They're saying they want to use him a little bit more in the passing game, or they want to use him in the passing game. Understandably, probably not going to get to like a 15% target share in that offense. Like, it's going to be pretty difficult for Walker to get that high, but sure, I'll bump him up maybe to like a 10 or 11%. Like, I think that's now a reasonable outcome for him based on the way these coaches are talking about how they just want to use him. And if he doesn't get there, he's not necessarily a bust of a fantasy asset. He's just back to the volatile Kenneth Walker, right? Like the guy that's an RB2, he's going to give you these spiked weeks, but he's going to be kind of a headache to manage in a managed season-long league, not so much best ball, but he's going to be more of a headache in a managed season-long league because it's going to be up and down, and Zach Charbonnet might get work, et cetera, et cetera. Is that the way that we should probably be thinking about things?
Well, first, let's go back a couple months when they asked Ryan Grubb about using running backs in the passing game. He said, I love using running backs in the passing game, which we didn't see a ton of that when he was offensive coordinator at Washington. We did see that when he was the offensive coordinator at Fresno State. So it's kind of dependent on the personnel for him, which is good, right? He's not forcing it if he doesn't feel like he has that personnel. And now he's talking about Kenneth Walker as if he views him as a, he doesn't have to be Christian McCaffrey of getting 8 targets per game. We just need like a few targets per game out of Kenneth Walker. And this is kind of icing on the cake, especially if he's staying around this ADP where he is right now. His hands are decent, right? This whole thing of like Kenneth Walker can't catch the ball is a myth. You can talk about not earning a target share. That's fine, right? But let's understand that he does have okay hands. Again, not CMC, but he's not Tank Bigsby, where like balls are bouncing off his hands here.
I think that's also something I want to shout out, is that like I don't think that there's a massive delta between an above average pass catcher at running back to a below average one, right? Mm-hmm. Like if you were to categorize as Kenneth Walker as an average pass catcher, I would like, just because his target shares have said what it said throughout, his history as a player, I'm not going to argue that at all, right? Like I think that's that's probably what he is. And so therefore a coach saying this could easily make Kenneth Walker see an uptick of 3% in target share. Yeah.
And there's also just like, how will they get him the ball? It's not like he's going to be running these deep wheel routes, right? He's not that kind of pass catching back, but you throw the ball out to Kenneth Walker kind of the same way that the Buccaneers used Rachaad White last season, as they would pass him the ball on these short little screens or whatever as an extension of the running game. And knowing how Ryan Grubb likes to get his offensive linemen out and like kind of moving them out in space, like we could see a lot of screens for Kenneth Walker this season, or these short kind of dump off passes, and we know what he can do once he has the ball in his hands. So we've seen him rip off just these monster runs time after time. We talk about
home run hitting, big playability.
So now you get that in a different spot, in a different way than just running the ball. So he can do it running the ball, and he can do it on these kind of schemed up touches where it seems like there's a little more chaos going on in the play, which is very much a Ryan Grubb thing. And that chaos benefits Kenneth Walker. He's been a very chaotic running back.
Yeah. It's a difficult eval for me, no doubt. Kenneth Walker and Alvin Kamara are the two running backs this year that have given me the most heartburn. It's a very, very, I've gone back and forth. I'm probably like, I feel like by the middle of August, I'm probably going to be above the market on Kenneth Walker after being below the market and saying that he was basically in a void for a little while, right? Like,
and that's a tough thing to do.
Yeah. Look, my game is not to sit here and stick with a take no matter what. Like when I'm getting more information, like through Coachspeak Index, and I'm using that information because my goal is to get people to win. Like my goal is to not just, of course I want to be right because that leads people to winning. But the fact that my ranking of Walker has changed and the way that I'm drafting Walker has changed, the 90% plus of people haven't drafted yet, right? So I'm fine with, I'm even more fine at this point, like, pivoting at least a little bit. I'm not saying that I'm going to like go out and get Kenneth Walker everywhere or say like, you got to get him everywhere. But I do think that all of this is really, really pertinent information because at the end of the day, I do think that Coachspeak Index and Coachspeak in general is really, really big at the running back position because it's something that I've talked about for years on this show. If you were to look at the positions in fantasy football, obviously quarterback, just the way it's scored, it's just a different beast. So talent doesn't necessarily always drive fantasy production. But at wide receiver especially, you got to get open to earn a target. Like you got to win these battles by yourself in order to get targeted in the first place. Now you got to hope that you have a good quarterback, you have a good scheme, all that stuff matters. But wide receiver is a more talent driven position when it comes to production. Whereas running back is, hey, if you're coach, if you're Sean McVay and you have Kyren Williams and you say, I want Kyren Williams to see 100% of the backfield touches, Kyren Williams is all of a sudden a top 2 or 3 running back in fantasy football. Doesn't matter how good or bad you think Kyren Williams is, what the coach is directly doing to that player and for that running back matters tremendously. And that's why when it comes to this kind of stuff, I'm way more open to changing my approach with these guys and my feeling, my vibes surrounding these running backs because of Coachspeak than I am other positions. Have you found that to kind of be the case?
Yeah, you have so much more control as a coach over what is happening with your running backs in the running game than the wide receivers. Like you just illustrated. Yeah, they got to get open. You don't know how the defense is going to play a certain guy if they're going to like triple team him like they used to do against Devontae Adams and in Green Bay, or what's going to happen with Jamison Williams. There's a lot more volatility with the wide receiver position, whereas with the running back, especially with a team that wants to run the ball, with the Rams last season, and Sean McVay didn't have anyone behind Kyron Williams that he trusted. So yeah, Kyron Williams gets a ton of work.
Yeah. And then it makes people like me or whoever, literally, I mean, I guess 99% of people, because no one thought Kyron Williams would be the bell cow that he was. Fortunately, I always talk about the Kyron Williams stuff because, I like every other fantasy analyst, I had him as an ad after week 1 last year, but I also was fading Cam Akers because of Kyron Williams. It's like I was so close to set, to being, I wasn't quite on Kyron Williams during draft time, but I was exactly. I was understanding that Kyron was going to be used in that backfield to some degree.
You had a smaller house in that neighborhood.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Let's talk about some of these backfields and what you've heard, what you've studied. I think one of the more intriguing ones, and this is another one where I've changed my opinion on a little bit over the last month, is Cincinnati, where you have Zach Moss. If you look at these players from like an archetype standpoint, it does make sense as a 1-2 punch. You get Zach Moss as sort of like an early down bruiser, maybe goal line guy. Chase Brown, a good change of pace back who can catch balls out of the backfield. A lot of explosion to his profile. I like Chase Brown a lot as a prospect coming out. But then he didn't get a lot of work in year 1. So his like year 2 score in my model didn't look great. So it's been a roller coaster for me with Chase Brown, but I've been incredibly bullish on Brown based on what I've heard and seen partially through or largely through your account, of course, but are all signs sort of starting to point towards Chase Brown? Or do you think that, based on your history with that coaching staff, this could just be a way of like motivating him or getting people excited about what they have in their backfield? What do you see out of that backfield?
So with Zach Taylor, like I mentioned earlier, completely unreliable on injury coach speak, and he's very self-aware. Like he talks about how unreliable he is in that area, but he does have an 85% reliability rating on player usage and workload coach speak. And what he is saying, what their de facto general manager Duke Tobin is saying, what their offensive coordinator Dan Pitcher is saying, what the camp reports are saying is that, yeah, Chase Brown is going to get a lot of work here. Zach Taylor said a big emphasis on his role this season. He said, I think he's earned that. I think he's worked the right way. They've talked about how they asked him to work on his pass catching during the offseason, and he's really, really focused on that. I believe Joe Burrow also talked about it. So, yeah, definitely see the role increasing this year. I'm still not sure how it's exactly going to play out in terms of a split because they haven't talked about, hey, this is going to be the split for these two guys. They do like Zach Moss a lot. They keep saying, like, we knew exactly what we were getting in Zach Moss. Like, he's doing every single thing that we expected, from him when we made that signing. The goal line role is just going to be so big of which of these backs gets the goal line role. People seem to think about Chase Brown as like the small running back, right? Because he's explosive. He didn't get a lot of third down work, and no real like short yardage work, and just like these, like, what are the pass protection issues with him? I mean, he's about the same size as Zach Moss, and the pass protection stuff, he graded as a pretty good running back in pass protection in college, and then last year didn't get many opportunities and didn't grade well when he did, but he has the size, right? I worry about a running back who's 180 pounds that
100%.
That isn't good at pass protection, but a guy who's like 210 like Chase Brown, you can work on that technique. You can't teach the size, you can teach the technique. And obviously he had some of that coming out of college. So, they want him to, they're talking about him as an explosive element in this offense. So at worst, I feel that Chase Brown is this, kind of change of pace running back, but one that gets 40%, right? Like a pretty split-ish share there.
Yeah, I mean, look, if I'm being totally honest, like if you look at market trends and you look at breakouts that we've seen historically in fantasy football, like he checks a lot of the boxes. The thing that really turned me off from a dynasty perspective was that year 2 score. And I still think, there's a lot of fragility to Chase Brown's like long-term profile, when you're looking past what happens in 2024. But if you're trying to place a bet on like a middle round running back, you want year 2 guys who are pass catchers, who are in good offenses. I mean, like, he's really checking a lot of those boxes. Zach Moss checks some of them, but I always tend to lean towards the pass catchers more just because we know that targets are more valuable in every single format. And now all this hype is just, it's just there for Chase Brown to the point where I'm fine with being really, really aggressive and targeting him right now, but I'm also fine with targeting Zach Moss. There's a lot of those really ambiguous up in the air backfields this year. I love it because I know that's where gold is found in fantasy football, and that's for you and for your business purposes. That's great because people are going to be seeking out that information. But I think Cincinnati's is one of the more intriguing. Another backfield that's a little bit more up in the air than it was last year. We just talked about it a little bit with Kyren Williams. My stance on Williams has basically been he is Sean McVay's dude. Like Sean McVay loves him some Kyren Williams. But then on the other hand, I recognize, his size. He's a little bit smaller than Chase Brown. I recognize his prospect profile coming out wasn't the strongest in the world. It wasn't that bad. I thought he would be more of a change of pace receiving back in the NFL level, but obviously he was a bell cow last year. And then you look at their actions and they go out and they draft Blake Corum, who of all backs in this class is the most that looks like Kyren Williams. Yeah. They draft him with a day 2 pick. So what have you seen through these interviews and such? Do you think that Kyren Williams is properly rated by the fantasy industry, or do you think that there is reason to be a little bit worried?
Well, the Rams certainly have a type.
Yeah, exactly.
Running back. They when they drafted Blake Corum in the press conference that night, and they were asked about him, and they said that they drafted him because he showed a lot of the traits that Kyren Williams had. We saw last season, they used Kyren Williams so much because Sean McVay didn't trust the running backs that they had behind him.
Yep.
And, when he was out, we got sort of a committee-ish thing with Royce Freeman and Darrell Henderson. And Sean McVay talked about when Kyren Williams came back, how completely different the offense was with and without Kyren Williams. So they didn't want to be in that situation again where, Kyren Williams, like you said, kind of a smaller guy, has had some issues with his legs, and they don't want to miss a beat if he needs to miss time whenever he needs a breather. Their general manager, Les Snead, said that the Blake Corum pick was more about kind of not totally wearing Kyren down. Is the exact quote from him. And Sean McVay just thinks of Kyren Williams like a second son. And they ran the ball more last season than they ever have under Sean McVay. And then this offseason, we see them, beef up their offensive line. I think this is a kind of a Sean McVay thing where he's staying a step ahead of the rest of the NFL. He sees linebacking cores getting smaller and smaller. So what he does is he beefs up his offensive line, and I think they probably run the ball even more this year as long as that offensive line is healthy. It's not going to be the 95% of offensive snaps that we saw from Kyren Williams earlier last season, because Sean McVay said during the season that, and I believe this was after the injury, that like we need to bring that snap percentage down a little bit. We can't be playing him 95% of snaps. every single game. We saw that start to come down just a little bit. So the Blake Corum pick is they don't want to miss a beat when Kyren Williams, either gets injured or needs a breather. And it's still going to be heavy Kyren Williams usage this year.
Yeah. I mean, I've definitely seen him as the RB1 in that offense. I'm a little bit more pessimistic versus the market on Williams, just because I think, number one, that Corum is not a bad prospect, but also, I think that there's just volatility to the situation, whereas I'd rather kind of get like a Henry in that range or something, or even like a Devon Achane I like more than both of those guys. But so that's mostly the reason. But yeah, I mean, like Kyren Williams seems like the dude. The one thing that I would say, and I brought this up on other shows before, and some people get angry about it, but there's the idea that Sean McVay only likes bell cow backs. And I would push against that because of exactly what you just said. Kyren Williams goes down last year. They didn't have a bell cow back. It wasn't like it was the Royce Freeman show. He has a bell cow back when either there's not a better alternative to a guy who's good like Kyren Williams is, or the guy's just a really, really good running back in general, right? Like a Todd Gurley or something, where you're not going to take Todd Gurley off the field. That's where I would push back on that kind of notion and idea. Where I wouldn't push back is that Sean McVay loves Kyren Williams. It's very clear he loves Kyren Williams.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So Tennessee's another team that we talked about briefly, but that's another ambiguous backfield. And I've been really bullish on the Tennessee Titans offense in general this year in fantasy drafts. I've taken both Pollard and Spears, but admittedly, I've leaned on Spears a little bit more because he usually goes a little bit later. And there's a lot of pass catching data that suggests that he's a really good player. But I have nothing against Tony Pollard if people want to go after Tony Pollard as well. But, you mentioned the interchangeable quote. I've been using that a lot just to cite what this coaching staff is saying. But do you see this as a potential this is a 50-50 thing going into the season? We'll kind of just see what happens.
Yeah. Now, Brian Callahan has said that at times, if there's a hot hand, like we will just keep riding that guy during games. But overall, this is a 1A, 1B situation, both really good pass catching backs. We know Pollard converted from wide receiver to running back, and we all saw how electric Tyjae Spears was last season when they passed him the ball and got him out in space. And this is an offense that wants to throw the ball a lot this season.
Yeah.
Like they've signaled that over and over, and they've talked about how important it is for the running backs to be a part of that. So definitely in best ball, I'm taking a lot of Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears. Not on the same teams, but different drafts. And then you have the standalone value of each guy, and then if something were to happen to one or the other, then oh my God, we're taking a trip to the moon here.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is like the definition of ambiguous backfields and why they're important. And there's so many of them this year, but you can't ignore the contingent upside of these guys and what can happen if one of them goes down, or because like the path for these players versus, let's look at Detroit. Detroit has Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery. Yes, there's contingent upside for David Montgomery, but number one, Montgomery's going a lot further ahead in drafts than a lot of these running backs we're talking about here in these ambiguous backfields. But number two, there's no natural way for David Montgomery to really overtake that backfield and become a bell cow and just be the dude, because Jahmyr Gibbs is objectively the superior talent between the two guys, and he's not going to leave the field. They're not going to just keep Jahmyr Gibbs on the bench. Whereas you look at Cincinnati, okay, Chase Brown's competing against Zach Moss. Like, could he take over that backfield naturally? Of course.
Yeah.
Look at Tennessee. It's not like Tony Pollard is coming off kind of a down year. I know that he surged towards the end, and I think that a lot of the negativity surrounding Pollard had a lot to do with just his lack of touchdowns and not being able to convert more than anything else. But regardless, he's in year 6 of his NFL career. He's never really been like a true effective bell cow. Would we be shocked if there is a larger lean towards Tyjae Spears, or even the other way around? Tyjae Spears is a little bit undersized. He's not like, is he going to carry a big work? So like a guy like Pollard could hypothetically take over. So that's why these ambiguous backfields to me are just so attractive because the talent that we're talking about here, and this is why I usually go after like the younger players, the up and coming players, because they seem to have a better chance of just naturally like taking over that backfield. But that's why they're just so important, and that's why something like Coachspeak Index, can be so helpful with those backfields in general.
How do you have the Cincinnati backfield ranked in relation to the Tennessee backfield?
So I have Cincinnati ahead. I'll say I have Chase Brown ahead of both Tennessee guys now. But then I think both Pollard and Spears ahead of Zach Moss. But I don't say that as in like, they might even be in the same tier, so it's like a choose your own adventure kind of situation. But the logic behind that again is the Chase Brown hype combined with Chase Brown being more the pass catcher, me being attractive to that kind of profile, because those are the guys that historically have hit at a better rate. Because it's not like you can't score touchdowns outside the goal line, and it's not like Chase Brown can't see goal line work like we talked about. Yeah. So I just think there's a little bit more upside with him, and I'm chasing that upside. Like at the end of the day, if I'm drafting an RB3, I want that RB3 to have RB1 upside, or at least have a chance to get there. And so that's essentially the way that I've been looking at those guys. But I do all summer I have had Tajay Spears one spot ahead of Tony Pollard.
Oh, spicy.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, maybe a little spicy. At least the ADP gap, because before, like on Underdog earlier this summer, it was like a 2 to 3 round gap.
Yeah, it was
between
big.
those two backs, and so I was just like smashing Tajay Spears. Now it's like a round to half round, like it's not nearly as significant as it was. But yeah, I mean, if that's spicy, it's spicy. I guess I'm it's just a player that I'm riding a little bit heavier this year, versus others.
Yeah, no,
all right.
I don't think it's too spicy. I mean, they're 1A, 1B, like.
Yeah. Of course. Do you disagree with the way that those are sort of laid out?
I have Tajay Spears like just behind Tony Pollard.
Mm-hmm.
I usually take Tony Pollard in a spot where I'm taking one or the other, and I think now I have the Tennessee backfield like just ahead of the Cincinnati backfield, but kind of, like you said, kind of in that same tier where it's well, how is my team shaking out? Like, what kind of profile am I looking for right here, and then making the pick dependent on that.
Yeah, I'll say this. I mean, I'm higher on all four of those guys versus the market, because I pushed down some of like the Devin Singletary, Brian Robinson types. They just don't do it for me nearly as much. And we won't be talking about them today, but I'd much rather be going after the ambiguous backfields because there's just so much more upside. The reason why there's multiple running backs being drafted from the same team in the middle rounds is because that situation is likely pretty good, right? Like Cincinnati, that situation is pretty freaking good. We've seen, although Joe Mixon hasn't been the most efficient running back in the world, we've seen his expected fantasy points just be amazing through the years in Cincinnati. And then, Tennessee, I'm buying just the offense in general, taking a little bit of a leap. So that's the main argument, I think, with those ambiguous backfields. Another sort of ambiguous backfield, but they're not being drafted very high, is Denver. This is the last one that I want to talk to you about. My first question is Sean Payton reliable? Because I feel like most people would just like offhand, just guessing, say that he's probably one of the least reliable, just assuming that he would go that direction. But whether reliable or not, how are you expecting the Denver backfield to sort of shake out?
Yeah, so he has a 50% reliability rating on
Shocker.
Usage and workload coach speak. So yeah, definitely not reliable. But, like I mentioned earlier about just kind of looking for signals from these coaches. And he has talked about Jaleel McLaughlin so often this offseason. And a lot of it has been unprompted, which is like the number one kind of thing that you look for.
That's like the holy grail of sports, of coach speak, I feel like.
Yeah. So his role, I feel, is very locked in. It's never going to be kind of a workhorse role for Jaleel McLaughlin, smaller running back, kind of in this, joker position that Sean Payton likes. But I think we see an average of probably 9 to 12 touches per game for him, and sort of high value touches, being used in the pass game, and we know how efficient he is with the ball in his hands. So that seems like the most kind of clear cut role in this backfield. And then you have that kind of first and second down runner position, which is Javonte Williams and Audric Estime most likely kind of battling it out. Sean Payton has talked quite glowingly about Javonte Williams this offseason, and talking about how he said that the complete heel finishes at 2 years for a running back or for a player coming off of an ACL injury. And we saw them give Javonte Williams 264 touches last season in the first year coming off that injury. And then Sean Payton body shames him this offseason into losing 10 pounds. So he looks like he did on his North Carolina tape.
Yep.
And it just seems to be headed in that direction of, okay, they're probably going to use Javonte Williams a lot. And they also do like his his pass blocking, it obviously his receiving work. He's a guy that can play definitely on all three downs. And a few like little orange flags in the way that he's talked about Audric Estime in the past of talked about, well, they took him because they had a 3rd round grade on him. They took him in the 5th round and just like really liked the value. And they said that he grew on them as they watched the tape, and talking about like, we could see a vision. But then we get the quote from him that sometimes there's a guy that you just want to leave a draft with, and Audric Estime was that type of player for them. And big hammer type of running back. Think about Mark Ingram and what role Payton was able to do with him. But he did say the other day, I put this in I don't think I tweeted it out. I think I just kept it in the Coachspeak Index Discord plug. But talking about Audric Estime, how like they don't, you know what? I'm just gonna pull it up real quick because I think getting accurate.
Yeah, do it.
Context.
Well, I'll say this. I'll say this while you pull it up.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think that of the players in that backfield, Javonte Williams probably has the most like natural bell cow upside, right? Do we see that this year? You look at how many touches he had last year, and you say, even if he gets that many touches this season, he's probably going to be a pretty decent fantasy asset overall. So I think that Javonte's fine where he gets drafted. Like I wouldn't call him like an obvious target, but I think he's fine. I've gotten a lot of Jaleel McLaughlin. I think McLaughlin's like a very easy player to pick where he goes.
Oh my
because
God. Great value there.
If you look at, I always look at running back archetypes. The Blake Watson train that was sort of getting, leaving the station in like May after they had picked him up as a UDFA. That seemingly has cooled down a bit. But
I haven't seen that train. I haven't seen that train since then.
Exactly.
Derailed. It's
exactly
in the junkyard
and I think a lot of people, if you look at the archetypes and you look at the 4 running backs, assuming Samaje Perine's not on the team, but if you look at the 4 running backs, Blake Watson matches the Jaleel McLaughlin archetype, and then Javonte Williams matches more of the Audric Estime one. I'll say this too, though, that I think Javonte Williams is a better pass catcher than Audric Estime is, because Estime didn't really have those chops or show them off at least, in college. So that's a plus for Javonte. But if you're dressing 3 guys on game day, that means that there's a lot less competition for the Jaleel McLaughlin role in that offense. And we know that Sean Payton loves to target his running backs out of the backfield. So that's why, of course, I'm not expecting McLaughlin to be like a top 5 running back in fantasy, but I think he's like, if he's healthy, he's basically a lock to not far necessarily outperform, but definitely outperform his ADP.
Yeah, we'll get a lot of spike weeks from him in best ball. And the quote on Audric Estime, this was 3 days ago. Sean Payton said, "Is he a 3rd down back? I can't tell you that relative to just the reps that we've seen."
Yeah. Yeah.
So
they even talked about it. Didn't they talk about it when he got drafted too? They literally called him an early down back.
Yeah. The vision is a 1st and 2nd down back.
Yeah, right. So it was like very obvious that they saw him in that way. And honestly, and longer term, because this is Javonte Williams last year in his rookie deal, but long term, Audric Estime plus Jaleel McLaughlin is not a bad 1-2 punch in terms of like what they can provide to an offense.
Yeah, the one thing I guess I would be scared of a little bit with Javonte Williams is, does Audric Estime get that goal line work? Just like really big, beastly back that once you get on the
he is
1, 2, 3 yard line, it's all right, let's bring in Estime.
Yeah, and like Sean McVay is a coach, or Sean Payton's a coach that will definitely use all three of those backs. Like this isn't a situation where he'll only use the top two. Like he'll probably give Estime some work as long as all three of them are dressed.
Yeah, I think the X factor is going to be like, how much does Samaje Perine, if he stays in town, how much does he eat into each one of these roles?
Yes, that Samaje Perine, yes, his presence still being there, because we're all almost assuming that he's just not going to be on the team, but his presence honestly could really ruin some things, whether it be Estime. Actually, I think Estime would be the dude that he probably ruins the most, because Estime then might not dress, let's say, on game day. But obviously then Perine would just dig into the other guys like we saw last year.
Right. I will say, watching all of these Sean Payton press conferences, he very rarely brings up Samaje Perine's name. He talks about these other guys a lot. And it like to the point where the other day when they were asking Payton about, hey, how do you feel about the pass protection ability of your running back room? And he was going kind of down the line and mention Perine. I was like, oh, we got a Perine sighting here.
Yeah, he recognized his existence on the team. That's good to see. All right, Greg, before I let you go, give me the biggest coach speak talking point that you think could sway fantasy football leagues this year.
Oh my God.
No pressure.
There's just so many. It's like picking your favorite kid, right? Right. Well, I think one, and it's kind of a different bet now than it was when we were first starting to get this, but it was Dan Campbell talking about Jameson Williams and looking at the timeline of comments. And again, Dan Campbell, extremely candid and just like blunt about players. Last year with Jameson Williams, he was saying, man, we just got to keep working with this guy, got to keep working at it. And then we saw that progress later in the season, said, okay, he's kind of coming around. We got to start using him in creative ways. We got to use him a little bit more. And then we saw that usage go up, and they were saying, hey, he's getting better. And then we see that coincide now with what Matt Harmon charted for reception perception of, the kind of first half of the season for Jameson Williams. And then after kind of mid-October, where the reception perception looks very different for him. Now in the off season, Dan Campbell saying JMO's pushing to be a full-time starter now. And when they're talking about this wide receiver 3 conversation, Jameson Williams is not a part of that. He's like pretty locked in at this wide receiver 2 now. And Dan Campbell saying he's a man on a mission. He's the standout of OTAs. Just very, very bullish things for Jameson Williams. And he was going in kind of the 100 range a couple months back when we were starting to get these quotes from Dan Campbell. Now he's gotten pushed up into kind of the early 80s, and people are really scared of, he's the fourth receiving option on the Lions. Well, what about the fourth receiving option on the Niners? Like, that's a pretty valuable role as well. And tougher bet in redraft, but for best ball with Jameson Williams, like a fourth receiving option on one of the best offenses in the NFL with one of the best offensive coordinators, like that can be a pretty valuable role.
Yeah, I think that I've talked about how history is not on his side just based on what we've seen historically. I think that, obviously he's gone through a different journey, but that has led me away from him in a managed season-long league. Not away, but just not like high on, right? I'm pretty much at market with him. But When it comes to best ball, I think that he's a classic better in best ball kind of guy,
Absolutely.
right? Like not unlike like a Christian Watson or something like that, just a better in best ball kind of player. And we just have to recognize that. And there is a little bit of contingent upside there too, because if Laporta or ARSB, end up going down, there could be a higher target share in store for JMO. So good call out. We haven't talked a ton about Jameson Williams on these shows this offseason, so I'm glad we got a little JMO out there.
Yeah, man, that brings the viewers in.
Yeah, exactly. We get some Detroit love here on this show. Greg, man, I really appreciate you and your time. Plug your stuff, man. Let everyone know where they can find you.
Yeah, Twitter at Coachspeak Index. And like I mentioned, we have a private Discord now. You'll see a lot of really super important stuff go on the Twitter, but I watch every single press conference from every head coach, offensive coordinator, and general manager. And I just spend all day on the private Discord. I have separate threads for each team. And there's a lot of really important information that like I just don't have time to craft tweets and tweet out. That just goes directly into the Discord. And what'll be really cool is, months from now, a year from now, whatever, these are ongoing threads. So you can scroll down, you can search for players, whatever, and just kind of see what the progression is of how the coaches and coordinators are talking about these guys. So you'll get the most recent stuff that they've said about them, but you also get this really nice 30,000 foot view when you're heading into drafts of, okay, what has Sean Payton been saying about Audric Estime and kind of draft off of that with that information, just giving you full context, all the most important information, super valuable. Definitely would not want to draft without it.
Yeah, that's really, really cool. Definitely check out all of Greg's stuff. It's been a very, very valuable tool for me. I've obviously shouted you out and cited you on this show a handful of times over the summer, and will definitely be continuing to do that as the season progresses. I'm on Twitter at LateRoundQB. Make sure you check out the Late Round Draft Guide over on lateround.com. Take advantage of that underdog promo. Otherwise, everyone, enjoy your weekend. And as always, thanks for tuning in.